Oh, so there's nothing like on Sundays you watch whatever this team.
No.
Okay, well that's a relief.
Oliver's always, if you ever listen to the show, that's one of our things. We always talk about sports, and Oliver and I are always bluffing. We have no idea what we're talking about.
On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's Opera Box Score. I'm your host, George Cederquist, joined on America's talk radio show about opera by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, Weston Williams, and Ashlee Hardgrave. All right, this week, tag team interview with both the composer and the star of a new production of the opera Soldier Songs. We go inside the huddle with David T. Little and baritone Johnathan McCullough. Soldier Songs is streaming now on the Opera Philadelphia channel, but you'll want to stay right here on the Dallas Opera Network for at least the next hour. And then, did you have a nice inauguration? Did you enjoy the singing? In Chalk Talk, the OBS team chimes in about which music they'd like to have whenever one of us runs for president and safely gets past that last hurdle of a valid electoral college certification. Viewer alert, by the way, you'll only find this Chalk Talk segment on the podcast version of our show. That's available on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher Radio. Plus, 2-minute drill, middleclassartist.com, more like middleclassartist.bomb. Zach Finkelstein investigates a predatory online voice competition. This is one of the weirdest stories I've ever come across. Who better than the greatest of all time, Zach Finkelstein, to break it?
Guys, I need you to know how devastating yesterday's game was for me. I wanted to see Tom Brady get his ass handed to him by Aaron Rodgers so badly. They were in a playoff game in the snow at Lambeau, and you got a whole bunch of Floridians coming north. I was like, guys, this is going to be great. It's going to be great. And then it just, piece by piece, it started to crumble. And so, yeah, Tom Brady's in the Super Bowl, whatever.
I suppose the only silver lining on that is Tobias Wright, old co-host and colleague and friend.
He's dead to us.
Nemesis.
Enemy of the show.
But very, very happy right now that the Kansas City Chiefs are in
You know what, though?
the Super Bowl.
They've had their day in the sun, and you know who really hasn't? The Buffalo Bills. I was pulling for them. We were all rooting for the Buffalo Bills, Tiffany.
We were. It was actually a really good game. They did have a couple of things. Again, I watched all 6 hours of NFL playoff games yesterday. But yeah, no, especially in the first half. The first half was a fight. It looked like they might be able to pull it off. But the fact that they were even that far was, I mean, good on you, Bills.
Do we have an equivalent?
Buffalo William was not with them that day.
Do we have a Tom Brady equivalent in opera? Don't say Domingo.
Someone who is deeply undeserving of all of the accolades, but is upsettingly handsome. I think we could probably find some.
I think that's me, Weston. I'm the Tom Brady.
All right, let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
So you all know that James Dara is the most sought-after director in opera right now because of the pandemic, and we were so fortunate to be able to talk to David T. Little and the star of James Dara's production of Soldier Songs, Johnathan McCullough.
Thanks, for having us on. It's always great to be back on the show.
Yes, my favorite.
Soldier Songs is interesting because it was the first opera that I composed, and I only realized that I had written an opera after Beth Morrison told me, Soldier Songs is an opera, right?
It is.
Surprise.
Yeah, I actually didn't know. And I'm really thankful, actually, that I didn't know, because I think I would have been, crushed by the weight of the form. Saying that I was writing a song cycle that would be staged allowed me a lot of flexibility when I was writing it, and allowed me to sort of step out from the sort of weight of the lineage. I wasn't thinking about Verdi and, Wagner, whatever. I was just like, I'm writing this piece and it's going to be staged, and that's exciting. And also writing it as songs allowed me flexibility in the process, where I knew that form, how a piece moves in time was really important to whether it worked dramatically or not. And by allowing myself to have discrete sections, it gave me a little bit of a safety valve where I can say, oh, that doesn't really work. I can switch those if I could reorder things if I needed to. And I think there were like one or two things that I did maybe reverse to help or reorder to help the sort of dramatic arc work better. I don't remember exactly. I mean, this is 15 plus years ago now. But I felt like that was a really, in hindsight, a really good decision early on, because it just made it less, kind of less stressful. I mean, it was still stressful, but I wasn't always afraid that I was going to mess it up by like making this decision, or that I was going to have to go in and do like extensive revisions because it was built in blocks, So yeah, and basing it on interviews, well, we can talk more about the interviews, but I think structurally it starts as a song cycle and then kind of disintegrates. And the end of the piece is this, the last song is this like 12-minute meditation where the singer actually sings very little. And so it's like a song cycle that undoes itself or something.
And I imagine that's a bit of a challenge to sort of not just sing, but also direct. And Johnathan, you did both for this production. And I watched the entire thing. I was super impressed with the production value, just the performance. How did you approach the sort of strangely segmented nature when you were both directing and acting to make it a cohesive whole?
Yeah, thanks. So I was like, so yeah, it is. When I first looked at it, I was like, okay, it's kind of structured into these three segments, right? Youth, warrior, and elder. But I kind of thought, like there's a through line here, obviously, because that's the way that David wrote it. And I kind of said, like, well, what if it's all kind of from the point of view of the elder? And we take the elder and we go back, because there is this kind of cyclical form in the whole piece where it starts with these bass drums and it ends with these bass drums. It starts with the interviews and it ends with the interviews. So I kind of saw it as, well, if he's the elder the entire time, we can kind of look through that lens from the beginning. And if we do that and we start at the elder and then he kind of lives his life like flashing before his eyes, then I kind of went into that and said, all right, well, I can incorporate these symptoms of PTSD that were kind of very important as to why I chose to do the project in the first place.
Right.
To bring light and awareness to what many veterans do go through that is kind of vastly unknown by the general public who doesn't go through that. Because it's kind of it's like if you know, if you've been there, like the piece starts out with, I never talk about this with anybody. And it's really a thing where a lot of veterans won't talk about the real stuff unless it's with somebody who's been there. And then that can also kind of lead to this downward spiral of bottling up feelings, which can lead to other things. So, yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to do when I looked at the structure and kind of not reworked it, but looked at it from a slightly different angle of taking the elder and going all the way through. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I want to go back to David for a second, because you mentioned, sort of the experiences and the stories of the soldiers. I want to talk a little bit about the origin of the text, which comes from these interviews. So Can you just tell us a little bit about the interviews and how you gathered them?
Sure. Well, so the piece began with a sort of reconnection with an old friend of mine named Justin Bennett, who we were both, giving a talk at like a career day at my high school. This is like 2004, I think, 2005 maybe. And, I was there to talk about being a composer, and he was there talking about being a field medic in Iraq. And I was like, okay, we have had very different experiences since
I'd say so.
and I realized the degree to which I had a lot of people in my life, both people I had gone to high school with, because, I graduated high school in 97. And so, 9/11 happened. I think a lot of people enlisted after. A lot of people had already enlisted. And I felt that I needed to investigate that, my connection through these people to the military. And looking deeper, I discovered so many of my family members had been in the military in Second World War and in Vietnam. And so I just reached out to people who I knew and who were available, so people who were deployed at the time I couldn't reach. And so, there were a lot of other friends from high school who, if I had written it at a slightly different time, I could have brought into this process, but they were still overseas. And I just sat down and I said, would you just talk to me about your experience, and try to keep it kind of informal. I maybe had a couple prepared questions. pretty vague, like, you know, what did it feel like to arrive at this place you were going? What was basic training like? And through the interviews, certain themes emerged, one of which being I never talk about this with anyone. This is the first time I've talked about this, you know, since I got home, kind of things. And the themes of the piece sort of emerged from these conversations. And initially they were just meant to be research. They weren't originally going to be in the piece itself. And at a certain point I realized, well, this is not my story to tell. I haven't experienced this. I haven't experienced these things that these men and women have experienced. And so that's when I made the decision to say, okay, I'm going to present, you know, the work is going to be framed by their words. And that's where the interviews came into the piece.
So this question is going to be double pronged. It's going to be for both of you, but I'll begin with you, David. There is so much tension that is created at the onset of this opera sonically.
Yes.
And I felt like I didn't get my breath until I don't know the name of the aria, but it's in the second part where there's like a really bad barbecue scene. And Johnathan is singing like probably the most lyrical part of the opera. It feels like classic baritone aria moment. But leading up to that, there's just so much, violence essentially, but the noise is just really upsetting. And I wanted to talk to you about orchestration and about some decisions you made. What are some of the devices you're using? So give us a little insight into how you came up with this sonic language. What are you borrowing from? Film scores? I don't know, experimental music. I don't know what, but it's not easy to begin with. You know, it does definitely make your heart race. Like I'm watching Dunkirk or something like that. You know.
Right. Well, so Soldier Songs happened at an interesting time for me as a composer in terms of my own development. And I had, up to this point, been very closed off to my own influences. And I said, well, classical music is this. There are specific ways that it is done, and that's how we do it. And right before I wrote this, I said, that's stupid, and I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'm going to write a piece, and I'm going to, if I feel that a certain moment needs to reference heavy metal or whatever, I'm going to just do it. And I figured at that point, I was like, hey, I was in my 20s, and so I feel like I'm young enough. If this is a disaster, I just pretend it didn't happen and move on and do something else. But it really unlocked what became kind of my language in a way, because I grew up with a very eclectic listening practice, you know, and finally that was all coming together in my work. So that's one thing just about the styles. I think the orchestration is connected to that because when you're referencing certain styles, you're referencing mediated sound and recorded sound. And, you know, if you're referencing heavy metal, you need distortion. Right. So, okay, well, now we have to just have distortion on the strings. Now we have to amplify the strings. Okay, everything's got to be amplified. Okay, we want some really low synth. We want some like square wave synth in one part. Okay, well, so now we have a synthesizer, you know, and so it kind of built on itself as I was writing it. And the result was a piece for 7 players. Originally, there was no drum set. Actually, the very beginning was just 6 players, and then I added the drum set later. Yeah,
because you're a drummer yourself, so that I'm kind of surprised by that.
So I wrote it for Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble, and they were a sextet with a baritone.
Gotcha.
Once I started working with Beth Morrison, we talked about it, and we said, you know, and I had my ensemble Newspeak was up and running at that point, and so Newspeak was going to play it and has continued to play it for the Beth Morrison projects productions, and I said, well, you know, I'm a drummer. I'll just play a drum set. So I actually premiered the drum set part. At the premiere of the Yuval Sharon production in New Haven. And then I realized, like, I can't be in the band and have an opera happening. Like, it's too much. I have no idea what's happening. It's really stressful. And so then I was like, okay, that was fun. Now we're going to have someone else come in and play drums. And I'll be in the house, like looking at balance and things like that. But what, you know, the result of this expansion was that we ended up with a piece for 7 players that sounds much bigger than 7 players.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot. And that creeps up also in Dog Days. You see a similar kind of thing happening. And so that became something I was really interested in as well.
Well, one of the things that Oliver and I both noticed that we both thought was interesting, beyond the heavy metal influences, was also like the references to a lot of like sort of traditional military music, sort of the snare drum, and the flute was something that we both picked up on. And there's I can't remember, there's a couple
Worst
of moments.
flute ever.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's one part, I can't remember where it is. I think it's in like the first third of the opera or so, maybe near the end of the first third, where there's like this ascending repeated major scale. It's not the full scale, but I remember being so unsettled by that, and just the way of that juxtaposition of that sort of instrument that in opera we tend to associate with happy moments or more playful moments, coming up against this hardcore sort of metal band sound and kind of being the more disturbing was just so interesting to me, and I think Oliver as well. When you were doing the orchestration, obviously I'm sure that came to mind, but I actually was wondering, did you do any modifications to the orchestration for this production at all?
Well, just one thing real quickly about
please do.
The military thing. So one of the things flute. And the evil flute. So one of the things that actually I haven't talked about too much traditionally, but one of my musical experiences that was really, really influential on my work as a composer was that I played for probably 10 or 12 years in a fife and drum corps in New Jersey. So I had this weird knowledge of like military, like colonial era and Civil War era military music. And the particular way I was actually driving somewhere listening to fife and drum music with my wife before we were married. And which I have to say, like, that she would drive somewhere and listen to fife and drum music with me was like a testament to how great she is. You know, not many people would do that. And she pointed out, she's like, this style of drumming is like, this is exactly how you think about rhythm. And I was like, oh, I never thought of that. It's totally true.
Yeah.
So there's so much actually of fife and drum music in the DNA of this piece, even though it's not necessarily, I'm not quoting fife and drum songs.
Right.
And so the flute certainly in piccolo is part of that. And then there's the big alto flute solo, of course, Old Friends, right, Johnathan? Old Friends with Large Weapons, which is just a really hard alto flute part. It's really difficult. And I'm so thankful for the many, many amazing flutists who have practiced a lot to be able to do it, because it's always, really, I think, a really beautiful moment, but it's very difficult.
Moving on a little bit to the singing aspect of the orchestration. I mean, one of the most striking things, I think, when you first hear soldier songs is sort of the opening, not the opening, after the introduction, where you, Johnathan, go into this hard falsetto right out of the gate. And from that moment on, you don't get any breaks. You're jumping styles. You're almost like a rock singer. You screech, you growl. You can you even like count the number of singing styles you had to do for this?
I counted at least 4 as the singer. I counted at least 4. Well, yeah, I mean that's a question. I mean, you're singing off your breath. You're doing all these extended vocal techniques. You're navigating in and out of what our music teachers might consider healthy tone production. So talk to me about that a little bit and what the experience is like, and then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, so I kind of think of it in it's all based on classical bel canto technique, right? And then I kind of just modify in each thing for whatever it's called for. So like I actually think more so like voiceover acting for the first one, and then actually like a little bit of yodel almost, switching between the two registers, because there is, I forgot which measure number it is, but there's one part where it goes from the child voice to regular baritone voice within, I mean, like a 16th note, and it just switches. So it's almost like doing a yodel, but without the breaking part, Yeah. So I kind of thought of that as, because it's not your typical falsetto like Carmina. It's a different kind of falsetto. It's a little more brash and like harsh. so I kind of thought that, and then there's like the Limp Bizkit kind of stuff where when we were rehearsing, David was like, "Listen to this Limp Bizkit live from like 1991," and I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I got it."
Yeah, right. Well,
That's the one you hear referenced a lot.
Fred Durst
Right.
artistic inspiration. Who would have thought?
I don't think
Yeah,
it was
right.
necessarily inspired by. I want to make that clear.
Sure.
It's not inspired
Very
by.
fair.
But
Redacted.
in the coaching, I was like, "What's the what is this character?" And I was like, "This is like pissed off. This is pissed off Fred Durst. So, yeah.
And then for certain movements like Counting the Days with the birthday cake scene and Two Marines has real bel canto stuff where you have these chords and then like a long smooth phrase, and then on top of that there's kind of like elements of musical theater in that it's a theater piece that is musical, not necessarily like ha ha or anything.
Right.
There were jazz hands in the first draft.
Yeah, I read the jazz hands.
There were not.
Had to pull those guys down.
Yeah.
But so I guess that's kind of the vocal style.
Encyclopedia there, the catalog.
Yeah.
Well, and that
It
was
really is
Rolodex, which one is today?
well, that was part of my sort of tiny follow up to that is that could you draw a relationship between, let's say, toxic masculinity of the character and some of those ugly, physically ugly sometimes sounds that you were asked to portray? I mean, because we got it, but I didn't know if that was part of something that was part of your process.
Yeah, so I mean, so it's interesting because it's definitely toxic and masculine because this video game scene is all about this
that boom bang dead just it
and the
really
violence
hurts.
And the
That's where
violence.
the violence kind of lives in the first part. Yeah.
Right. But I think it's a little different than like Howard in Dog Days, because that's a different kind of toxic masculinity where it's like, I am the alpha of the household and anything that anyone else has to say doesn't matter. Right. It's not quite that, but it definitely, David and I had talked about this and how it's more in the realm of what it means to be a man, as society has called it, which just kind of goes hand in, I don't agree with this, but hand in hand with this, like, that means you are, or it goes hand in hand with violence.
Right.
And basically like, kill them all, not a man, kill them all, not a man.
Right.
It's, if you can't kill, then you're not a man, and that kind of stuff. So that's how I think that.
Well, and also the idea of dehumanizing an enemy and making them not a man but a insert epithet makes you able to kill them, right? So there's like sort of double meaning of that.
Yeah, that's
David, you seem to have, well, in the two works that we know of that we've seen now, toxic masculinity and violence is like your brand.
even in like some of the like instrumental music, like an Agency and pieces like this, that like there's this sort of core of violence and really sort of like it reminds me of Wozzeck in a way where you have like the sort of the reveling in it musically, but at the same time you don't break away when the horror dawns in, And I was wondering what is it about it? Yeah, what is it about it that keeps you coming back to this sort of theme?
It's an interesting question, and Wozzeck, Wozzeck was the piece, and Peter Grimes were the two pieces for me that made me think, I could live in that world of opera. Up to that point, I was like,
twins, me, same.
I was like Weston, yeah.
Yeah, but up to that, I was like, this Mozart's nice, but I don't know. And then I was like, Wozzeck, Grimes, So, and I think for me, it's connected a little bit with my interest in political art. Which I feel like lately my work is less explicitly political than I think it was, maybe a decade ago. And I'm sort of moving into sort of other areas. But this idea that there are, horrors in the world, there are awful things in the world. And we have a choice to either look at them and learn from them or pretend they're not there, which does nothing but let them continue to happen,
Yeah.
And, a piece like Haunt of Last Nightfall, is, about a horrific massacre that the United States government was, involved in, supported, and it felt important to me just personally, almost as as an expression of my own experience of learning about it, to say, to acknowledge that it had happened, to say this, this happened in my lifetime and I didn't know about it, but to what degree does that matter? Am I still complicit? How am I still complicit? Or, and to really just ask those sort of questions. So I think that question of complicity perhaps is at the core of a lot of these questions that I ask through a lot of my works, and the question of, just the sort of belief that we have to stare these difficult things directly in their face, and engage with them and address them. Otherwise, it's just this endless loop. And I think the idea that Soldier Songs itself is a loop,
Right.
Pieces that form cycles. That's a thing that a couple of pieces of mine do. That idea of trying to break a loop is important to me, because I think society hasn't always been the best at doing that. I think for me with the question of masculinity, I have to give a lot of credit to Utah Phillips, who was, I don't know if you guys know him, but he's died in 2008. He was a sort of wobbly folk singer, who I got to know through his work with Ani DeFranco. And, he had very particular takes on what he called the blueprint for self-destruction that you were handed as a man in American society. And that, he felt that his father had lied to him about being a man. His grandfather had lied to him about being a man, that he had been sold this bill of goods that was just wrong. And for him, that included being in the army. He was in the army, he was in Korea, and actually went AWOL at one point, and kind of hid out for a while. Had this very sort of dramatic experience, and I got to know him a little bit, toward the end of his life, and I know a lot of his stories really intimately. And so this question of, I think in a way, this piece maybe started subconsciously from this story that this is something that society teaches you, and with Soldier Songs, the question is like, well, how do we as a culture make our soldiers? And what does war do to those same people, those soldiers who fight it? And, what is there to be learned from that? How can we make the world better by investigating it? How can we help those who have been, who are suffering with PTSD? And what are the bigger implications of it, for the next generation who, has an opportunity to kind of potentially reject that same story that has been taught generation after generation about what it means to be a man, and that's associated with violence or whatever. So I think Utah Phillips, if anybody doesn't know him, I really recommend checking him out. He has an album called The Past Didn't Go Anywhere with Ani DeFranco, which I think is really great. And the story of him leaving Korea and his sort of epiphany in Korea is all on there. And so I think, thinking about this question, I think that's where it started for me, which would have been probably I think in college, I heard that album for the first time.
I mean, it for me as a person of color and not a woman, though I do advocate for women all the time. I feel like it's rare to find a straight white guy, a cis white guy like you, who's like thinking about these things and reckoning with them and putting them, in an art form that, look at this Johnathan guy. Like, he's such a hunk, he's such a bro, and making him go through all that stuff in this show. I mean, you really put yourself out there, and it's very vulnerable, and it's touching that you allow yourself, or anybody who sings this role, I imagine, has to do that in front of an audience, and even now in front of a camera for however many thousands of people will see this, Well,
and when you get to Two Marines, the question of real vulnerability of being a father and father losing a child, so there is deep emotion in there. And I think when I did the interviews with people, I saw some of this, the emotional vulnerability creeping through. There are a couple things that people said where, like my one uncle tells a story about, he was in Sears and was talking to a woman who was at the checkout counter who was Vietnamese. And he says this was the first time he ever talked to a Vietnamese person about the war. And they had this long conversation. And at the end of the conversation, she thanked him. This was the first time that anyone had thanked me for what I did. and this is after him saying like the stories where he thought he was going to not make it home, and these really harrowing moments, and for no one to have even acknowledged the difficulty of that was very difficult for him still, and so this idea that there's this artifice that one needs to build up around that vulnerability for one's own protection or whatever, I think is part of the sort of big picture. And I think that's, again, the stuff that Utah sort of advocated, that this idea that, as I think he would say, like, you were born a white man in mid 20th century America, you were born armed to the teeth with the weapons of privilege, and you have to go into the world unarmed. That's your task, is to unarm yourself, So Utah, I was hoping that I would have been able to interview him for this piece for Soldier Songs, and it didn't work out for a number of reasons. But I did. There's a related piece called "And the Sky Was Still There," which is a sort of outtake from one of the veterans I interviewed, Amber Ferencz, about her experience of being thrown out of the Army under the "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" policy. Mm-hmm. And I was able to quote Utah, use a sample of an interview that he did with Democracy Now! And he says, well, yeah, I joined the Army, but sometimes you learn things the hard way, something like that. I kept forgetting it now, but I joined the Army. Sometimes you learn things the hard way, but that's how you'll never forget it.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Agreed. Jonathan's next question goes to you. I want to talk about sort of the on-camera performance that you gave. The theme of isolation and the zeitgeist around it. To what extent was the zeitgeist of isolation something that you were thinking about during this performance?
Yeah, I mean, something that I wanted to show was just how alone this guy was. There's one shot where we pan up and you see that there's really nothing around, and there are a couple of kind of shots that show that. So, I mean, it was...
But for 1 second, there's a scene in Big Bill in Kill Bill when
what movie is that?
When Daryl Hannah, I forget the name of her character, the one with the eye patch, goes to kill the guy with the snake, and he lives like in a trailer, like in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
Have you seen Kill Bill?
Big Bill?
I haven't seen Kill Bill.
So when this movie first, I was like, oh my god, it's Kill Bill.
That's cool.
All right, sorry about that. Go on. Big Bill.
Yeah, I didn't want, part of this also plays into this, these neuroses of being watched, or like, there's one scene where we put up newspaper on the window, and there's like looking at the light, like, why is that flickering, or who's outside, like 2 kids went by, why are they going there again, 2:00? And it goes into this idea of the neuroses that can go along with certain aspects of mental illness, and I wanted to kind of bring those to light, and again be like, look, these are things that happen to people, and it's again going along with that theme of if you don't know, you kind of can look at somebody, and a lot of times people end up getting marginalized by society, and I kind of wanted to bring to light, like David just said, if you don't know, you can't change it. So in that aspect of this subject of isolation, I wanted to kind of go along with that. Plus, it goes so much with what everybody's dealing with right now, and when we were in lockdown, right, and everybody's alone. It's something that everybody can kind of relate to. Of like, I go through this routine of every day. I get up, I brush my teeth, I take a shower, maybe I eat,
and nobody ever hugs you ever in the whole opera.
And you don't so have any human touch, and there's no, even when someone does come to the door, it's not answered, and the only thing that other person in the show is just coming to say some really terrible news. So it's not like, oh, great, a person. It's like, oh, right, a person. So that's kind of what I wanted to portray in that.
Well, Jonathan, I feel like the thing you're sort of getting at is empathy, right? That you want to sort of create a situation where people can feel empathy for others, and I feel like the piece itself, it's been very often it's used to reach out to veteran communities, and there have been a lot of amazing conversations with veterans, and post-show discussions and things, and special private viewings for veterans. But I think also it's really important for families of veterans and friends of veterans who maybe haven't ever had these conversations to be able to see the piece and get the beginning of a kind of understanding of what the experience was. Yeah. Even if those discussions never happen with that person, this sense of like, oh wow, there's some heavy stuff could have happened. And I think it helps you as an individual, as a citizen, to be somewhat gentler.
Yeah, and I think like what you were saying earlier of how David uses the orchestration to kind of not shy away from these intense moments.
Oh, it's triggering.
Yeah, and it purposely does, and I wanted to mirror that visually as well, to put people in the shoes of the character as much as possible so they could actually feel what he was feeling, which is why I kind of do some of these quick cutbacks to say like, oh, this is what he's seeing, so the audience can get that point of view. So like there's one transition where he's in his home, which becomes a tank, and then all of a sudden he's outside, the music changes from to this. Yeah. And I wanted to create, almost if you're watching it in a movie theater, that you're in this really dark atmosphere of just like go, 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 go. And then all of a sudden that's quickly juxtaposed by this really bright on a white background, so that if you're watching in the movie theater, you are just as shocked and kind of like blinded by this bright light as he is in the film, going like, how did I get here? How am I in these clothes? Did I do this again? Oh my God, I need to stop doing this. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking a lot these past couple of months about, opera moving to different platforms because of the pandemic. And I think people can see even from the trailer how different this really will be, like the production values and the thought and skill that has been put into this. I'm going to give both of you a chance to big up James Dara as we say goodbye to you. Do you want to say anything about working with him and having him realize your vision and what maybe surprised you, and maybe some of the things he asked you to do, Johnathan, that were like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll try that. That's going to be embarrassing.
Yeah, James was amazing to have on set, because I had never directed a movie, and he's done both, and I've been a big admirer of his since I knew of his work, because I covered Breaking the Waves when he did, so we met then. But yeah, so basically I came to him with this, or we came to him with this idea and said, this is what my plan is, and this is like the staging, but this is all written in a score, and he's like, you can't give a score to a DP and the grip team and the lighting guys and all of them. They're gonna be like, what is this? So it was like, this needs to be a screenplay. So he took all of my kind of staging plans and went, okay, now it's in a screenplay form, so that the DP could tell his team, okay, page 6 of the script, which is really page 32 of the score on measure blah blah blah, is when the lights go into party mode here, and that they're like, oh, okay, got it. In addition to that, like there's this video village kind of thing where all these monitors are, and James would kind of be my eyes and would talk to me through this earpiece that was playing the orchestra as well, and say, oh, you got to move a little to the right because you're like, okay. He's like, now you need to do a little bit of it's coming across, you're doing a little too much, like pointing your body towards the camera, things that I wouldn't know unless I like had to like go back and see it every time. But we only had so many hours per day, and
how long did it take to film the entire thing?
We had 10 hours a day, which sounds like a lot, but like if you look at that tank scene,
right,
that was one day of shooting.
Yeah.
Each scene has how many angles you see in that scene was a whole new setup, and it takes like an hour and a half between each setup sometimes.
I think we had 7 sessions for the recording, for the audio, for the orchestra.
A morning session and an evening session would be 2 sessions. And then to film the movie, we had 10 days over a 14-day period, 10 hours per day. And then we've been in post-production until 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, right. Pretty much.
Yeah.
But just to say, if I can just interrupt for 1 second, Johnathan, I think, what's really exciting about what we're seeing with what Opera Philadelphia is doing, and I think this moment, is that, film has always been central to the way I thought about opera. And I've had to very often say, well, this is the moment I want, but we can't do that on stage. So what's the stage version of that, I think now we have the ability to sort of embrace that. And I think so many of my collaborators, I know James is like that, Johnathan, Royce Favrick, certainly, one of my main collaborators, we all came up with film. And so I think there's a really interesting moment if we can embrace this approach and this new exploration of cinema and opera. I think some amazing things are going to come out of it. And I think, what Johnathan and James did with Soldier Songs is a tremendous start. I think I'm thrilled with it and really I'm very thankful, Johnathan, for, that you had this idea, which is a great idea in its non-film version. Yeah, hug time.
Thanks for rolling with it.
Totally.
Johnathan and David, thank you so much for coming on to Opera Box Score. We're going to share the trailer as long as we can get away with it, and we're going to put in some beautiful footage.
Crossed.
And yeah, congratulations. It's an incredible project. It's very moving, and it's a very beautiful thing to look at. Actually, it's not beautiful to look at, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Powerful. It's powerful.
Other parts are, heavy.
Well, thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Soldier Songs is available until May on Opera Philadelphia's channel. It's operaphila.tv/soldier-songs.
This just in, the 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Didn't get as much play as Gaga or J-Lo, but Renee Fleming also participated in Inauguration Day events, singing Schubert's Ave Maria and America the Beautiful at a private mass attended by President Biden and VP Harris. Quote, singing for something of this magnitude comes with unique challenges. Imagine looking out while singing and seeing rows of faces from your daily newsfeed, said Fleming.
The Boris Martinovich voice competition is in hot water after listing supposed contestants who did not actually apply, posting singer bios and videos with the competition's logo added, all without consent. According to middleclassartist.com, the online competition appeared to be falsely populating the website to solicit more $90 non-refundable application fees from eager and non-suspecting singers. Since Middle Class Artist's story was published this morning, the singer's information has been removed from the website, seemingly within hours of Finkelstein's inquiry to the competition. A representative from the competition responded to Middle Class Artist denying responsibility.
Both conductor Yannick Nézet-Séguin and AGMA President Ray Menard have written open letters to President Biden calling for relief in the performing arts industry and to suggest that a Secretary of Arts and Culture be added to the U.S. cabinet. In order to progress, to elevate the arts, we need a voice at the table that will be heard, said Nézet-Séguin. We nominate Oliver Camacho for the position, who has graciously agreed to accept as long as he can sit next to Pete Buttigieg.
This week's draft picks. LA Opera has announced that friend of the show Russell Thomas will be named the company's next artist in residence. Thomas will have influence in artistic planning and casting, and will head 2 new training programs, one for singers from historically black colleges and universities, and one for LA public high school students in underserved communities. Singers can do more than just sing, Thomas told the LA Times.
The Metropolitan Opera has announced that Marcia Lynn Sells will be the company's first ever Chief Diversity Officer. Sells comes to the Met from Harvard Law School, where she has served as the Associate Dean and Dean of Students since 2015. She will be tasked with implementing a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan to be at the core of the company's hiring, artistic planning, and audience engagement activities. Better late than never.
Friend of the show Julia Nula-Marat has been tapped to lead Opera Columbus. The Canadian producer recently served as associate producer of the Boston Lyric Opera and co-artistic director of Guerrilla Opera, which is also in Boston.
Long Beach Opera has named its inaugural Minister of Culture, Alexander Gedeon. Mr. Gedeon will be tasked with working as a member of the production team on LBO's 2021 operas, developing projects for future seasons with an emphasis on cultural inclusion, researching and creating more opportunities for increased diversity in creative design teams, and producing and performing his original podcast called Towards a New Opera, another podcast.
The International Classical Music Awards has announced Spanish conductor Pablo Eras Casado as 2021's Artist of the Year. Other winners include Hermanella Yaho for her album Anima Rara, the complete recording of Ambroise Thomas' Hamlet, starring Stéphane Degout and Sabine Devier, and a Lifetime Achievement Award for Edita Gruberova.
Opera Project Columbus has announced the launch of its virtual intensive vocal academy. The online courses include a tour of opera in Italy, Ask the Maestro, and My 50 Years of Dressing Opera Stars at the Met. My submission, Unpleasant German Operas You've Never Heard Of, was rejected.
All right, Yellow Card, Red Card is back. This week's Yellow Cards go to...
Spain. Bass baritone Florian Besch gave a recital at the Teatro de la Zarzuela on January 25th.
Also Spain. Auditorio de Tenerife presented Poulenc's La Voix Humaine over the weekend with soprano Carmen Acosta with mandatory social distancing and face masks at all times.
Florida. As of this recording, tickets are still on sale for Opera Orlando's Hansel and Gretel for this weekend.
This week's Red Cards.
Spain. The Palau de les Arts Reina Sofia has announced the cancellation of its whole run of Verdi's Falstaff due to COVID-19 cases in the production team.
Also Spain, Liceu has cancelled its Tannhäuser due to social distancing limitations and expanded the socially distanced seating of the orchestra for George Benjamin's Lessons in Love and Violence into, well, the orchestra seats.
Germany. The Deutsche Oper am Rhein is closed through March, while the Komische Oper Berlin and Staatstheater Cottbus are shut down until at least Easter.
Switzerland. Theater Basel will postpone 2 productions to future seasons, shutting down until at least March.
And Sweden. The Royal Swedish Opera has extended closure until at least March 26th.
And on this day, January 25th, in 1683, it was the first performance of Alessandro Scarlatti's opera Il Pompeo in Rome. In 1694, it was the premiere of Giovanni Bononcini's Circe, also in Rome. Vivaldi's Impermestra premiered in 1727 in Florence. In 1776, Tommaso Traetta's La Merope premiered in Milan. It's Cinderella Day. Rossini's La Cenerentola, or The Triumph of Goodness, premiered in Rome in 1817. Jumping ahead about 100 years, it was the world premiere of Umberto Giordano's Madame Sans-Gêne in 1915 at the Met. In 1886, one of the most widely regarded symphonic and operatic conductors of the 20th century, Wilhelm Furtwängler, was born in Berlin. Von for Weston, in 1909, it was the first performance of Richard Strauss's Elektra in Dresden. In 1945, it was Richard Tucker who made his most successful debut as Enzo Grimaldo in La Gioconda at the Met, heralding a 30-year career as the company's leading American tenor of the post-war era.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
I love Elektra. This is such a good opera. I can see Oliver reaching for the mute button right now.
No, I love Elektra, actually, but I just don't need to hear you talk about it for a long time. So,
okay, I think we can take a hint there. We had talked about the recent draft picks for this week. Ashlee, at the Metropolitan Opera, hey, they did something right.
They did. I'm actually really excited for Marshall Lascelles. I think that this is a great hire for a number of reasons, you know, demographics included, but also the fact that she comes from higher education, the fact that she comes from Harvard and Columbia. She worked for the NBA. She was VP of Org Development at Reuters. So she's got this really interesting resume. And the notion of bringing in somebody from higher education, albeit from a different language within higher ed, I think is going to be a really great thing for them. She's going to bring a new set of eyes. She's going to listen not just to the people that hired her. She's going to listen down, because I've heard wonderful things about her over at Harvard Law through my other connections to my other life in law school. So yay, Marcia. We love her.
And just having that kind of experience at so many different types of organizations it speaks well to her ability to fit into any sort of org structure and like really put the rubber to the road.
Agreed. And one more note, I mean, she's got a JD from Columbia, so she's terribly intelligent. But also, I think having somebody who comes to the table that has that legal language and that legal foundation in mind,
Right.
It just adds a layer that we haven't had before in this type of leadership. So I'm actually really excited for that.
I love Russell Thomas and what he had to say about singers do more than just sing. Such a great choice for LA Opera to put a singer into a position of authority and decision making, and I got a good feeling that is really going to trickle down through that organization.
It's a weird name for what his profile is going to be. What his dossier? What am I saying? His what does Jared Kushner have? His portfolio is going to be
his purview.
But I think it should be a different name. But at any rate, they are trying to distance themselves from Placido Domingo, who was the last
A good call.
Well, dare I suggest Minister of Culture as a name?
That I was like, I read that. I'm like, what is this? A Soviet Union? What? Why would you name him the Minister of Culture?
Oh, we like Long Beach. It's fancy. So
it was an odd name, but I'm sure he'll do a lovely job.
It doesn't have to be the Soviet Union. It could be like Hogwarts or something, you know?
Ooh, that's true.
They have ministers in England, George. You should know.
They do indeed, yeah. Can I tell you a bit about Gilbert and Sullivan?
Please
No.
Quick, mute him.
We did that episode already.
Ashlee, the letters. What do I need to know?
The letters are, well, I want some of my colleagues to weigh in on what the letters are. I have a counterpoint after they speak about these letters. But once again, we have more open letters that have come out. Weston, I feel like you've got thoughts on this.
Well, first of all, I feel like, I think maybe before 2020, everyone said that the art of letter writing was dead, but all of these opera luminaries have brought it back.
We found it.
We got time now.
They are back, and it is fancy. The idea of a, dare I say, minister of culture for the U.S. Could be, I think it's an interesting thought because we have not had in the U.S. the same level of cultural recognition that we would see in the governments of a lot of European countries, especially.
But actually, there's something that worried you about this.
Yes, and it's in the nomenclature of having it be a cabinet level position, because what happens when you put somebody on the cabinet of the United States is that you automatically put them in line of succession for the presidency of the United States should ish go down. So if we make this person a cabinet level position, they would be 19th in line for the presidency. So unless we're paying lots of attention to the whole designated survivor scenario, I mean, things have been weird. Let's be honest. We got to keep everybody scattered and keep them apart. But yeah, if this person becomes a cabinet member, they're 19th in line for the U.S. presidency.
That does make me a little nervous because I feel like maybe 20 years ago, James Levine might have been appointed, and then we'd be in a real scenario now, wouldn't we?
Nope.
The story that Zach Finkelstein broke on middleclassartist.com has to be one of the strangest things I've read in probably the last 3 hours. Somebody pipe up and talk me through just how strange this is.
This competition that is named after a famous singer, according to the PR person that was responding to emails. There's a competition, and it's like, here's a section of our website that shows all of these lovely, competitors. What they've done is they've taken, without these artists' permission, their qualifications, their names, although in some cases they mash their names together, not unlike what you see on all of our screens right now. And then they took YouTube videos, edited them, and slapped the competition's logo on them, and then posted them. All of this without the artist's permission.
Including one girl who they just used a picture of Pretty Yente to be her.
Which is pretty bad for a number of reasons.
It's It's absolutely maddening. And all of this kind of, again, the magic of social media, this all kind of fell apart in about 36 to 48 hours. So middle class artists first started thinking about this stuff yesterday. They posted the story on the 24th. They reached out to the competition and said, hey, we've gotten wind that these aren't people that are actually competitors. They know you're not using this stuff without their permission. Then the competition doubles down and says, well, someone must be applying with fake names and fake. So basically they absolved themselves of responsibility and said, well, we clearly didn't do this. When it's like, but why would there be
We're
logos?
all trying to find the guy who did this.
Exactly. We're all trying. And as of this taping, per social media, about 10 minutes ago, the 9th singer was discovered who this competition had used their stuff without their permission.
Yeah. And also, if you go to their sponsorship page, they have like the wife of this, what's his name, guy. She has like a life coaching business, and then there's also some Korean.
They're claiming Denise Graves as a judge for the competition.
And she was like, I might have agreed to do it. I haven't heard anything about it.
Yeah. And then there's also like a Korean orphanage, like, you can submit
That's
your
not
money.
real.
Yeah.
It has Nigerian prince scam levels of shadiness about it.
But here's the thing, is that there might actually be a competition, and somebody
Maybe.
who competes, who paid $90 to audition, might actually end up winning. But all it means is that this guy, whatever his name is, I don't want to say his name to amplify it.
Boris
Boris Martinovich is trying to raise money.
Boris bad enough.
Is trying to raise money to put on a concert at Carnegie Hall. And he's going to drag along whatever the 3 winners of this competition to perform on stage with him, to sing an aria. And that's their privilege as the winner of the competition. But really, it was just a way for this guy to big up his own career.
Mm.
I mean, like, stealing signs in baseball kind of pales into insignificance on that. Well, we certainly won't be linking the competition on our website, but we will be linking the
Feel free to send us $90, though, if you would like.
Non-refundable.
We will go ahead and link the middle class artist article to our website, operaboxscore.com as well. Let's wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call on Opera Box Score.
Good calls and bad calls abound. I have 2, so I guess I'll go first and last. First of all, to our listener mailbag, you can always write to us, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Nayusha from New York City wrote in. She says, quote, I didn't like opera before OBS. Now I love it. I didn't like sports before OBS, and now I hate them a little less.
We'll take
I think that's where Oliver is, to be honest.
Yeah, if you write into us, we have some amazing merch. We have some beer mats, just like this. Opera Box Score, America's Talk Radio.
Are you
show
saying you'll
about
send them
opera.
one?
I will send you a beer mat.
Okay.
I will send you a beer mat.
It's hard to do that by email, so.
You're going to send a photo and attachment. You have to cut it
Hey,
out
guess what?
later.
You can print out your own beer mat. Oliver, you got a good call or a bad call?
Oh, there's a really nice story in the New York Times about a virtuoso American puppeteer named Basil Twist. He's making his directing debut at the Opéra Comique in a 18th century French opera called Titon et l'Aurore by Jean-Joseph Mondeville, which is a co-production of Les Arts Florissants. And you can see the article at the New York Times, and you can see the opera streaming for free on Medici TV.
Matt Cummings.
Wiener Staatsoper has picked up their streams again, and on the Thursday, the 28th, they are going to be showing the Abduction from the Seraglio that they did last October with Bay among Bays, Lisette Oropesa, and friend of the show, regular Mühlmann, and Wir stahnen. That's...
I'm glad that stahnen is not a separable prefix verb. Weston Williams, the silent giant, as always. Ashlee
I got
Hardgrave.
nothing.
I have one, but I want to go back because you said you had 2. What's your second good call, George?
He wants to save it for the end.
I wanted to save it for the end.
Okay, then I'll do mine and then we'll do yours. Mine is actually kind of an on this day. On this day, 25 years ago in 1996, Rent gave its first premiere off-Broadway. So happy birthday, Rent. You gave teenage Ashlee great joy in rotation with her Alanis Morissette album, but more importantly, you helped her understand La Boheme for the first time. And also, we miss you and your promise, Johnathan Larson.
Very true, very apt words there. Lastly, at Hawaii Opera Theater coming up Friday, January 29, featuring Quinn Kelsey And ukulele player Tamane is a Cunny Capilla, which is basically like a sort of impromptu jazz session. There's going to be opera, there's going to be ukulele playing, there's going to be Hawaiian culture. I play ukulele myself. I love this idea, and I cannot wait to see it. That's at hawaiiopera.org. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer is Norm Woodel. He's at normwoodel.com. On Facebook, search for Opera Box Score. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Opera Box Score. Help us deepen the bench of listeners by liking and sharing our social media posts. Email at us at operaboxscore@gmail.com. Subscribe to the podcast on Stitcher, or just favorite our show on Apple Podcasts. The views and opinions expressed on Opera Box Score are solely those of the show's creative team. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of the accounts of this show without the express written consent of Opera Box Score it's fine. Just tell everyone. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For our guests, David T. Little and Johnathan McCullough, and your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashlee Hardgrave, I'm George Cederquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you sing Happy Birthday to Mozart on Wednesday, January 27. We're back with an all-new show, February 3, the Dallas Opera Network. Podcast on February 4th, more opera headlines, more hot takes, more executive orders from Oliver. Join us.